My name is Frederick Secrece, and like you, I am an educator. Today I will be your host and guide as we take a look at the Common Core State Standards for English Language Arts and Literacy. The video you are about to watch is designed to provide you with an overview of the Common Core State Standards, what they are, who created them, the guiding principles for the development of the standards, and how the standards invite educators to make shifts to instruction from what they've done in the past. As educators, we know that making real changes in the classroom is serious work that takes more than just one video or session to achieve. Careful consideration of the standards and how they will impact what is done in the classroom is a process that takes time. Time to think, ask questions, and determine how best to drive achievement in this new environment. Before we begin looking at the standards and what they mean for instruction, it makes sense to first answer a fundamental question. Why transition to higher, clearer, more rigorous standards? Why not just use the standards we've been using all along? Imagine you're at a track meet, and they are just about to start the hurdles race. As you look down at the track, you notice something strange. All of the hurdles are set at different heights and are spaced out unevenly. Each runner is running a different race. How can the race be fair if the track isn't consistent for all runners? How will we know when runners are making progress or falling behind? How will coaches instruct their runners on how to run the race? Even the fans will be unable to tell how each runner is performing. This has been the problem with academic standards in the United States. For years, states have been setting different standards, and in many states, students have been considered proficient even if they have not attained a level that prepared them for college and careers. The results have been uneven, and our students have not kept pace with their international peers. Persistent, dramatic achievement gaps exist, and remediation rates remain high. And the students who have been most affected by these variations have been disproportionately students of color, students of poverty, English language learners, and students with disabilities. To confront these challenges, accelerate learning, and ensure a level playing field for all students, no matter where they live, the governors and chief state school officers from 48 states came together as part of an extraordinary collaboration, the development of consistent, rigorous academic standards for English language arts and literacy and mathematics. The development of the Common Core State Standards was from the outset a state-led initiative with a very clear goal: to develop fewer, clearer, and higher standards that apply the most advanced, current thinking on how to prepare young people for college and career success. To reach that goal, the standards were informed by extensive research and evidence, the best of previous state standards, the experience and expertise of teachers, content experts, leading thinkers across states, as well as feedback from the public. The standards are also internationally benchmarked, so that we can be sure that students who master the standards will be prepared to compete with students from other nations in a global economy. The final standards were released in June of 2010, and since then the Common Core State Standards have been adopted by 46 states and the District of Columbia. In other words, more than 85% of students in the United States will be held to the same high expectations and develop the essential knowledge and skills they need to succeed. So what does this all mean? Michael Casserly, Executive Director of the Council of the Great City Schools, offers his perspective.
The Common Core State Standards are one of the most important education developments in public schools in well over a generation. They achieve 5 important things. First, they set a common set of expectations for where our country is going to be internationally. Second, they set a common set of goals for the academic attainment of our students. Third, they elevate the rigor of instruction in our classrooms across America and smooth out many of the inequities that we now see in our public education system nationally. Fourth, they allow all of our major city school districts across the country to share materials, share approaches, and share their expertise as they implement the Common Core Standards. And last but not least, they hold the promise that the nation's urban school kids will be college and career ready.
While the standards list what students should know in each grade, teachers and administrators will continue to decide how students should reach those goals. With support, Teachers and administrators will inform the decisions on what materials and tools are used in bringing the intent of the standards to life in the classroom. This is where the real work begins. States, districts, and schools are already hard at work developing a shared understanding of what the standards mean, improving curricula, developing stronger assessments, and offering professional development opportunities, all aligned to the new standards. The goal of this work is simple: to make instruction more effective so that it can help students achieve the goal of college and career readiness. What follows is a real-world example of why these standards are so important.
One of our old students is in a PhD program for criminal justice at Rutgers in Newark. And we took her out to dinner, and she asked me what we're doing now. And we talked about the Common Core standards and our work in it. And we talked a little bit about text complexity. And she says, and now she's obviously a successful student. She was successful in 3rd grade, she was successful in 4th grade. She did not come here as an English speaker. Her parents didn't speak English. But in talking about the transition from high school to college, we asked her, when we talked about the Common Core, she said, you know, when I went to college, what I found was when I had to read something, I had to keep the dictionary next to me all the time, which she didn't have to keep next to her when she was in high school. And when we asked, well, was there anything else? Was it only that you had to look up more words? She said no. She said that things were just expressed differently. The ideas weren't expressed the same way. I couldn't get it the first time I read it. I had to constantly read it and reread it. And I think she put in a nutshell what these standards, what text complexity is.
Ultimately, achieving college and career readiness is why we've developed this video, which will look specifically at the Common Core state standards for English language arts and literacy. Throughout the video, we'll hear from education experts as well as from lead standards writers themselves, including portions of video taken from sessions they've participated in all across the country. First, we will focus on the 3 shifts in English language arts and literacy instruction. Then, we will look at practical ways to translate these shifts into effective classroom instruction. And our last section will cover how to communicate about the standards with parents and other education stakeholders. We've also included breaks in the video. During these breaks, you will work with your facilitators to further explore concepts, work through sample problems, and ask questions. Our hope is that this video will provide you with information, understanding, and a few helpful suggestions as you begin the process of bringing your new standards into the classroom. The National Assessment of Educational Progress, or NAEP, is the gold standard for measuring student achievement in reading, as well as other content areas. Here, David Coleman discusses the historical trends for reading scores and lingering lags in student achievement that indicate the need for the Common Core.
We have hit a wall. Despite all our hard work over the last 40 years, it has not changed at all. It has not changed during a period which educational spending has doubled or tripled, depending on how you count it. So if you think of, and none of us need to argue, and I will not dare to lecture you on the fact that if a student can't read past the 8th grade level with confidence, they are doomed in terms of being ready for college or the demands of career. For high school texts of any range, all of it is an evasion for them because they can't access them. So none of us need to talk about whether that's important or not. So what do we do about this wall? What I'm asking you to think of the core standards is a spear or an engine designed to tear down that wall. Does that make sense? For 40 years, we've hit a wall in later reading. How are we going to take it down?
Educators know the value of quality standards, but standards on paper don't drive student achievement. Parents and teachers do. And for teachers to understand and teach the new standards, they'll need to know the fundamental differences between what has been done in the past and what is required by the Common Core. That brings us to 3 Common Core instructional shifts. The first instructional shift addresses reading and writing across the curriculum, which complements the content of the standards in history, social studies, science, and technical subjects. This offers new grounding in informational text and places an increased emphasis on students building knowledge from that reading. In K through 5, implementing the standards requires a 50-50 balance between informational and literary reading. The K through 5 standards also strongly recommend that students build coherent general knowledge both within each year and across years. In grades 6 through 12, English Language Arts, or ELA classes, place much greater attention on a specific category, literary nonfiction. This interdisciplinary approach to literacy in the standards addresses the reality that most required reading in college and workforce training programs is both informational in structure and challenging in content.
The first shift in the core standards is the emphasis on building knowledge through literacy in K-5 and in 6-12. Building knowledge through reading and writing, speaking and listening, beginning in those earlier grades. So one of the starkest things about elementary school in this country, so remember what we have here. We have a situation where kids are learning to read, it would appear, but then can't read further in more complex texts. Is that a fair hypothesis given the 4th grade data? So what happened? Well, let me give you a potential theory of what happened, which is overwhelmingly in those grades, over 80% of the time by the measures we can see, and some studies as much as only 7% of their time, are reading informational text. In those core elementary grades, over 80% of their time, they're reading stories, which are wonderful, by the way, and I will talk about the role of literature in early grades, and I'm not attacking it. But what I am doing is drawing on a huge and overwhelming and undeniable body of research in my judgment, that particularly in these early grades, the knowledge and vocabulary closely related to it that you build in those early years through reading widely about the world is essential to reading later complex texts, texts of greater complexity, as well as texts throughout the disciplines. So the core standards mark a clear departure in that they demand a 50-50 split between informational and literature in K-5. And by informational text, I mean text about science and history and the arts. And of course, the standards pay enormous respect to the structure of stories and literary knowledge, which also is a source of knowledge. Massachusetts, by the way, has wonderful elementary standards, and they really infuse the K-5 literature standards and made them very strong. But at the same time, there are standards about growing in your knowledge and understanding by building coherent knowledge within a grade and across grades. So you'll notice in the standards is the example of the human body, where students are reading text during the year, building their knowledge, and across it.
Building knowledge is important for English language arts and literacy instruction. It also builds the foundation for comprehending challenging texts in later grades, post-secondary college, and career settings. Shifting away from today's emphasis on narrative writing, the second shift places an emphasis on students writing to sources. For instance, using evidence from text to present careful analyses, well-defended claims, and clear information. Rather than asking students questions they can answer from their prior knowledge or experience, the standards expect students to answer questions that depend on their actually having read the text. Likewise, the reading standards focus on students' ability to read closely and grasp information, arguments, and ideas and details based on text evidence. Students should be able to answer a range of text-dependent questions, questions in which the answers require no information from outside the text, but instead require interpretations based on careful attention to the text.
The second shift is reading and writing grounded in evidence from the text. And so this is what we commonly refer to as reading like a detective and writing like a reporter. So there are a lot of efforts afoot, a lot of writing going on. People have been doing this. It's one of the movements that have been going on. But it's not really the writing that prepares for college and career readiness. So most of the writing that's going on, I would say K through 12, is a lot about narrative writing. Still, there's a strong place for narrative writing in the elementary school and some middle school, but even in the high school, most of what students are writing is, in response to what we consider decontextualized prompts, like, talk to me about your favorite hero, or, would you like a garbage dump across the street from your house? And what the shift that's required for college and career readiness, in other words, that's what we're building, that's the goal. What do kids need to be successful in the job or in college isn't so much about writing about their personal opinions, but take a piece of text, digest it, understand it, reread it, and then write about it. Write to inform somebody about what you read using evidence from the text, write to make an argument using evidence from the text, and continuously going back to that. That is the college and career-ready skill that the standards are built upon. So what you see throughout the standards for reading, writing, and we'll talk about text complexity next, is this staircase to say, here's where we need kids to be by graduation. What implications does that have for high school instruction, middle school instruction, and elementary instruction as well?
Next, David Coleman discusses current practices in English language arts instruction and illustrates the necessity and importance of the second shift, paying close attention to requiring students to cite evidence from the text.
We put the book The Great Gatsby into the standards, an excerpt from it. And someone asked the question, does this sound familiar? How does The Great Gatsby reflect on the failures and opportunities of the American dream? Like, sound familiar? Literature class, right? What does that question do? You can write half the essay in advance, right? The American dream is filled with prospects and also dangers. People strive, and sometimes they fail, blah, 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 blah. We got to get that blah, blah, blah out of literature. It kills literature. Recitation of what you already know and think is the enemy of letting a poet or an author pull you in insistently into their world and giving themselves your full attention. Simpler, humbler questions. What exactly is here? What's being said? How does it connect to what was said before? How does it trace through the poem? Do you see what I'm doing? So that you keep more specifically getting drawn in, but at the same time learning general habits or techniques that you can use when encountering a new poem. So a text-dependent question, I just mean to be very simple, is one where the answer is only found through that. It does not mean something that is explicitly stated necessarily by the author. When I say, what can you infer about the letter you received, you're not just reciting you're seeing what you can infer from that, or what can you infer about the structure of his argument. He doesn't announce, I'm making 3 arguments and I'm using different evidence. A strong reader develops that understanding, but it comes from the text.
The standards build a staircase of text complexity. Rather than focusing solely on the skills of reading and writing, the third shift highlights the growing complexity of the texts students must read. They do this so that all students are ready for the demands of college and career-level reading no later than the end of high school. Closely related to text complexity and inextricably connected to reading comprehension is a focus on academic vocabulary, words that appear in a variety of content areas. You may be thinking, how does this type of instruction work in the classroom?
And so what the standards have kind of put in place is this staircase of complexity so that what students are reading in high school is much closer to what they're going to be expected to read both in career settings as well as in college. And that meant that the complexity levels kind of shifted all the way from elementary school all the way up through high school. We also need to pay attention to phonics, to fluency in the development of complex text. So we're not saying, just throw a tough text in front of a group of kids and expect them to swim in that pond, so to speak, but that is particularly in early elementary school, we do need to pay attention to the other fundamental foundational skills of reading, not just give them complex text and expect them to be able to deal with it.
One of the foundational blocks for early literacy is accessing complex texts through read-alouds, which is the bridge to developing fluency as students learn to read independently. David Lieben elaborates.
Read aloud has to be a bigger part of K-2 instruction than it's been before. If we're raising the level of the syntax, where do children learn to use that syntax? They don't learn it with what they're reading on their own in first grade. They have to learn it from read aloud. So the read aloud has to be a larger part of K-2, and it has to be more complex text. It can't be something that's written at a first grade level. Read aloud has to be a bigger part of K-2. Also, the standards emphasize informational text. What the students read themselves in kindergarten and first grade, and even to a great extent second grade, is not going to be very rich informational text. That has to come That has to come from read aloud. Thirdly, if you look at the standards, many of those standards in first and second grade cannot be met with the relatively simple text that children read on their own in kindergarten and first grade. It can only be met with what is read aloud. Just take a quick look anytime you get a chance at the first grade standards, particularly standards 6 through 9, and ask yourself what my students are reading on their own in guided reading. Can they use those books that they're doing in guided reading to meet these standards? The chances are not. So read aloud has to take a much larger place in the K-2 curriculum than it's been before. Fluency. Jeannie Chall in 1996 did a study with the National Assessment of Educational Progress, NAEP. 40% of our fourth graders in 1996 were disfluent. Tim Rosinski did a study with ninth graders, urban ninth graders, in around 2000 or so. 50% of the ninth graders in the 3 large urban districts that he studied were disfluent with reading 8th grade material. They could not read fluently 8th grade material. Well, the 8th grade material is now 6th or 7th grade material. We had half of our urban kids, less than a decade ago, couldn't read with fluency 8th grade material. So if we don't attack fluency systematically and directly, and then we go ahead and we raise the complexity level of the text, we're going to have half, probably 3/4 of our urban kids not fluent enough to read this newly complex text. So fluency has to be addressed. Learning from text independently. How often do we give students a text and hold them accountable to learning what's in the text? We often give them something to read. If they can read it, fine. If they can't read it, we tell them what they need to know from the text. It's very rare that students have to read something on their own, address some questions about what they just read, with no front-loading from us, no guidance from us, and no support, which of course is exactly what they do in college. But we have to hold them more accountable to the learning from text independently. If this is not done in science and social studies, then this whole thing will fail. If this falls completely on the ELA teachers, it will not work. Literacy and reading and writing have gone completely out of science instruction. We've now switched it so that it's all hands-on and all activities at the elementary level, so learning from a science text is virtually absent from the elementary school curriculum. That has to change. Science and social studies teachers have to use text and hold children accountable to learning from text, or the Common Core standards will not work. That will not be an easy transition. Reading in the content areas is what we call that. So it will not be easy to make this switch to hold our social studies teachers and science teachers accountable to using some text and having children learn from that text independently as part of this shift. But it absolutely has to happen.
In order for students to read sufficiently complex texts, teachers at both elementary and secondary levels will need to provide students with frequent practice while giving support along the way.
To be clear, we conceive in the standards and as individuals that as students write an obligation to do extensive practice with support, of course, with sufficiently complex text throughout their classroom work. Do you see what I'm trying to say? So yes to some leveled work on their own and as an intervention strategy, yes, yes, yes. But those kids, what we're not doing is, we're all reading the Gettysburg Address today, but you go away to read another thing. Even though you may be behind, I realize these are controversial words, you're going to participate in much as you can in that common work. I may give you further intervention work around that same difficult text, helping you with it more. I might do some pre-work with you on it, but not pre-work that summarizes it or gives it away so you can't have that wonderful experience we all had together, right? I'm going to work with you. I might work with you with several level texts, etc. But I'm not going to kick you out of the room when it comes to more complex work. In fact, you're going to practice it again and again and again and again, so there's a chance that you can actually finally do that level of work. If I exclude you from it, it is impossible. And that's exactly what's happening to the kids we care about most. You would be astonished astonished at what kids are given to read. I must say another word about level texts. There is no great author who has written with their heart and soul and care that wrote a level text. So what you have done to text quality by leaving kids in world of level text, you have said to them, you must catch up. You must work harder at reading than everyone around you in order to catch up, and you've given them gruel to feast upon. Doesn't work. Do you see what I'm trying to say? So I'm trying to say that what we really need to think about is, what does it look like to get a wide range of kids into the practice of complexity? It's anxiety producing. There will be frustration by those kids. I get it. Frustration, by the way, is the part of every strong reader. And it's opening up to that, it's allowing that, it's managing that frustration in productive ways, providing scaffolding along the way. And I want to say here that I have the support here. It's not like there's a large group of people within the ELA community and others that have been for a long time struggling to make sure that we get adequate complexity and rigor to these students, but these standards are very firm in that requirement. Am I being clear? So that's a real shift. The second part of that is the academic vocabulary and language that supports it, right? So one thing we've talked about, I'm sure today, is it means, in addition to words like amoeba or cell wall, that are quite technical in what are called domain 3 or kind of domain-specific words, words like exhibit or specific or hypothesis or consequence. These words are common to virtually all complex texts. Often those words are not helpfully bolded on the side of a page when students are reading, so it takes a new consciousness among teachers to pay attention to these words that really repay a lot of attention. Does that make sense? And so you want to get your teachers focused on that language so that they're supporting it. But we're trying to say if those three things are kind of watchwords of your teachers in this first year, that's a lot to know about literacy right then and there as a starting point. The shift towards the greater use of informational text, the use of evidence in reading and writing, and a focus on reading a few more difficult things.
Lily Wong Fillmore further indicates the need for rethinking the instructional supports for English language learners, language minority students, and struggling readers. This is what close reading looks like with scaffolding built in for students on different reading levels.
Many young people have learned a variety of English. It began as a variety of English, and which eventually grew into bona fide dialects of English. So I'm talking about American Indian children with whom I have worked these many years in New Mexico, in the Pueblos, in the Navajo Reservation, about the Alaskan natives in the villages along the Yukon River, along the Kuskokwim River, and African American children, many African American children in our schools who have not thrived in the way that they would like and we would like to see happen. And Latino children who no longer speak Spanish, and Asian children, the many, many children in our country, all right, who are English speakers. They speak only English, but their needs are similar to those of English learners who are just in the process of learning the language. So I'm going to ask, well, what about those kids? Now, many educators have been wondering, now, English learners and these language minority students are not exactly thriving in school right now. How could they possibly manage the more complex materials implied by the Common Core? Their worry is justified. It's truly justified. There is no way English learners or language minority children can handle text or performance tasks like the ones specified in the Common Core documents. That is, unless more attention is given to their language needs than is evident in ongoing efforts to map the Common Core standards onto curriculum or in the design of sample lesson plans, as I have seen these past months. But it would be a whole another story. If we were to provide these children the instructional support they need.
The following exercise demonstrates how the use of read-alouds and close reading strategies help students develop academic vocabulary.
Alright, they need to flap their wings in order to make it fly, right? That's very good. Very good observation. You're really observing like scientists. Very good.
Boys and girls, let's today continue our study of the metamorphosis of the butterfly. Okay.
Alright, boys and girls, now I'm just going to tell you probably something you learned about butterflies. Eyes on your tongue. Butterflies flap their wings. Butterflies flap their wings.
Excellent answer. So let's share them together, okay? So, monkeys?
Butterflies pump their wings.
Butterflies pump their wings. Do you know why?
So their wings could dry.
So they could dry. Good.
Milani?
Butterflies have long proboscis.
What is proboscis for?
So they could drink nectar.
That's right, they use long proboscis to drink the nectar.
Tongue to
Just
drink
like a
nectar.
straw. Very good.
Very good. Lots of hands. Good. Bo. And then Brian. Bo.
Butterflies drinking nectar from the flower, then the chrysalis not coming out. Then the one is coming out now. And they're melting. They're good, Andrew.
Okay, so you have a lot of information there, saying a lot of things. You started by saying they get nectar, they get from the flower, right? Then there's a chrysalis, and something happens inside of that chrysalis, right? We're going to look at the sentence we looked at yesterday for just a minute. And look at your sentences. That you do a sentence, and it happens that this lady, Irene Kelly, who wrote this book, It's a Butterfly's Life, which is great. She was excited too about butterflies, so she wrote a book. And this is her sentence that we looked at yesterday. So let's look at her sentence and yours. Look at the next part. And wait.
Right now, you get a chance to read it, okay? We're going to get together as a
Read
class.
it together. It's
The most awe-inspiring event in a
Butterfly's life is its metamorphosis as it transforms from egg to caterpillar to chrysalis.
very good. And transforms.
Why do you right there?
That's a very important word.
It's just an accident in some way.
So let's look at your sentences too, okay?
So boys and girls, these are ideas we got from you yesterday.
Right?
Whoa.
Which has to do with a transformation. A big change, an important change, right?
All right.
Boys
Boys and girls, let's read sentences together. All right?
Butterflies lay eggs on a little leaf.
That's in
This is in use idea.
The caterpillar had to come the egg.
Brian's idea. Brian.
Inside the chrysalis, the caterpillar turns into a pupa. The chrysalis is the cover to protect the pupa.
Chinese idea.
Those sentences are about the metamorphosis.
What about the butterfly?
There's also one sentence down here about metamorphosis too.
Can you read that one?
The butterfly.
comes out of the chrysalis.
We're going to talk
We're going to
about
talk
these.
about it later.
These sentences are about the next part of the sentence that we looked at. Because this is we really picked our longest sentence, boys and girls. We didn't even realize how long it was when I read it. We were like, wow, this is like amazing that we have such a long sentence. I know. Okay, let's see if we can get it. Let's look at the last part of this. This is really long. Whoa. You can even count the words for this one. Let's look at that last part. Emerging as a creature of delicacy and grace. And we spoke about delicacy and grace. We spoke about something beautiful that has lightness and grace. And some people, you mentioned some things. Let's look at what you said. You said,
Bonnie said,
the butterfly is beautiful like a flower.
so a flower has delicacy and grace. And I thought of something, but let's read the next one that you thought of first. Olivia said, oh wait, Carson. Yeah.
the butterfly has
How about the wee one? I said that.
That's good.
This is about a
That's about the transformation.
The butterfly comes out of the butterfly.
Right. And the last one is?
The butterfly is graceful like a dance.
Like a dance. So a dance, a rainbow.
Like a color.
All right, look at our chart. First, you're growing inside of an egg. Can you say growing?
Growing.
Can you sit?
Growing.
You're growing inside of an egg.
Let's say growing.
Growing inside of an egg. And then what are we doing?
Also, do you have a red
There are eggs there, right. Then you're cutting a circle. Why? To get out. Cutting a circle, standing up, and now you're wriggling. You say wriggling? Wriggling. Melting down, and inside the chrysalis, you're changing into a soupy liquid, and you're all mushy and soft. And all liquidy. And then you're going to form. What are you forming? Wings, and antenna, and legs, and you're emerging.
As you can see, students from various backgrounds can learn and use academic vocabulary with the right instructional strategies and support. Ultimately, these early experiences with complex texts will prepare them for the more demanding tasks of later grades. What follows is an explanation of a model lesson in English Language Arts for high school age students led by David Coleman of Student Achievement Partners. In the new Common Core State Standards, there is a concentrated and collaborative effort designed to ensure high school students graduate prepared for whatever path they may choose, be it a transition to a four-year college, community college, a trade school, or entry directly into the workforce. In the next sequence, Coleman explains the model of the close reading process at the high school level.
I want to remind us all that the kind of instruction that we're going to do together, that we're going to think about together today, is very artificial. It worries people, but I could imagine at least a week of instruction on these two texts alone. At least. And so it's stupid to spend half an hour with you on something that could take days. But I want you to just get a taste of it, of what it means to read a text and allow it to set the agenda.
Following his introduction, David Coleman invites the conference participants to experience a close reading example featuring two classic poems, One Art by Elizabeth Bishop and Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night by Dylan Thomas. First, David asks participants to silently read each poem to themselves. Then, David calls on two volunteers to read aloud each poem, allowing participants further access to the poems. After two encounters with each poem, David begins to engage participants with questions relevant to the text. What is one similarity between the two poems? What is one difference between the two poems? The goal of this questioning is to force the participants to return to the text again, truly reading each text closely.
So just a couple of notes before I'm going to give you an activity. A couple of notes about that process. A, as you could tell, virtually without any introduction at all, I asked you to read the two poems. You know that's very countercultural to just allow you in that way to dive into them. We're going to talk about that more later, but there are a lot of consequences that follow them. One of them is that I shut up and allowed those two voices to dominate for a moment, right? They became, it's interesting, right? The second thing is, while you had the time to read on your own, which I am very well aware for many students will be a time of disorientation and anxiety, quite intentionally, at least these are rather brief lyrics, right? They're fairly short. That time that you spend not understanding and finding words that confuse you and other things is rather short. We've spent very few minutes, but they're pregnant minutes, but they're short. Then they were read out loud to you. Intentionally, two people who were so good that you won't believe me, but did not practice and did not know that I was going to call on them. And two wonderful things about that. One is that merely reading something out loud, beyond any other scaffolding or explicit support, allows students 2 or 3 grade levels below to access it. So it's a wonderful way to share to a broader group, to allow the reading of something out loud. I want to emphasize, I don't mean by that a magnificent dramatic reading that's practiced where all teachers become. What's wonderful about these poems and about well-written text is that they have such a strong cadence built into them that you could feel it rolling from, I mean, wasn't it kind of wonderful to get up here and read something unexpected and feel the force of its rhythm guiding you as you did it, as anxiety is producing as it is to talk suddenly in front of 150 people. And I hope you heard that in the reading of them, the sense of that. So a lot just happened. You've had time to independently encounter it. No matter how frustrating that was, you each have had it. You've now heard them read out loud. I think the great rescue here, I'm just going to throw out a hypothesis there. The great rescue from what is a very hard question is to the power of short things, okay? What I mean by that is, when I talk about a short text, you see how short those poems were, in a way? Or a short text like the Gettysburg Address or a wonderful New Yorker article or something, you're not saying splinter in everything. You might even have a novel in common. You might have a couple of short things in common. And that does have power, because you can say, gosh, I taught the Gettysburg Address. I couldn't handle the beginning. Did you? There's power in that. But when you're allowing and celebrating short things worth reading, you should, of course, in my judgment, allow for a mixture. Some short things that are in common, because there are benefits to that. The standards are sparing about insisting on anything taught in common. The energy in the standards around that are largely around the founding documents, some American literature. So when you're looking for things in common, those are particularly useful things to create in common. But I think the power, particularly of your teachers who are a little more nervous about all this, to dare to teach something that they just think is so darn interesting. But remember the rule they have to keep to. Because love can be deceptive, as we all know. They must share their love by only allowing into the conversation what the text allows. They can't share their love by saying, let me tell you all I know about this subject and we're going to read this text. Do you see what I mean? So they have to love the investigation of that thing. So I find, peculiarly, it can be amazing for a teacher to teach a text they know and love, but equally powerful to teach something that surprises them and they're unfamiliar with. So I would say, love what's strange as well as what you know. Am I making any sense? Show some love for that text that you'd think is not so great. Because one thing about reading something carefully is you can see beauties in it you never expected. C.S. Lewis says something quite beautiful about this. He says, in the face of a work of art, he says, look closely, and then he says, look closely again, surrender yourself. Look, listen, receive, get out of the way. He says the only way you can judge the value of a work of art is to indulge it in such a close examination. Do you see what I'm saying? So when teachers say, I love this and don't love this, you got to say, like, okay, do a few you love, and do a few you don't, but look at them closely enough until you're sure. that you may find something in them that surprises. Does that make sense? That's the game here. But that is only possible if we're restrained and say it with short things. Does that make sense? We can't swap in novels with that kind of flexibility. I'm not saying you don't teach novels with the core and that you don't helpfully divide them into shorter segments and work on them. But there's a special power, playful even, I do mean this to be playful, where you can spend a few days with kids on something that you just love. You might read it over the weekend, a great editorial, or an article in a magazine that you just think is so well done, you've got to share it with someone. That's one of the joys of teaching. Does that make sense? As long as it's adequately complex, it's totally in the game. And that's one thing for an English teacher, you know what I mean? I mean, again, like, they might read a short story over the weekend, but also they might read something in the New Yorker or some, and now, since literary nonfiction is wide open to them, they can bring that in. I do think really a bit of experimentation and pleasure with an understanding that people may stumble is totally okay. Let's not regiment too quickly this time.
Let's consider a few practical but powerful ways to get started. During the first year, identify 3 to 5 difficult texts for close reading and careful attention. Use the set of exemplars developed by student achievement partners for implementation in classrooms and provide guidance for development of subsequent units of study. Work on developing text-dependent questions for both reading and writing tasks. Start examining existing curriculum materials and begin to identify non-fictional texts that will balance out the language arts classroom in order to achieve the 50-50 split of informational and literary texts. There are many organizations that are partnering to work with districts and offer support as you make these changes, from building awareness and offering resources to providing you with tools to measure your implementation progress. For instance, we invite you to visit the Council of the Great City Schools website, where you'll find links to resources available through the Assessment Consortia, PARC, and Smarter Balanced, as well as tools and materials from organizations like Achieve, Student Achievement Partners, and other organizations working on the implementation of the English language arts and literacy standards. In addition to those resources, numerous national and state-level organizations are also working to develop materials, guides, and tools that will support your work in implementing the Common Core. Ultimately, the most valuable source for information on effective implementation practices is each other. Because the Common Core have been adopted by the vast majority of states, teachers from across the country now have unprecedented access to lesson materials and ideas from a national group of teachers. It is through this collaboration that we can generate better outcomes for students. Education consultant and standards expert Sandra Alberti shares this perspective.
You really do have this opportunity now that no one needs to be an island. We all kind of have the same challenges at the same grade levels. There's some nuances of difference, but I think what will bring us together in this era of Common Core is very promising. You know, the types of conversations we can be having, the specificity of the conversations that we could be having are huge.
In addition to the promise of teachers working together across states, the Common Core state standards have important implication for students and families who relocate from one state to another. For the first time, parents, teachers, and students will have a consistent understanding of what skills and knowledge students should be developing at each grade level. Teachers are in a unique position as trusted sources, sharing information with parents and explaining why the standards are good for their children and what it means to hold them to higher expectations. Educators should be prepared to explain to parents that the work required to reach the goals of college and career readiness will be harder than in the past, and that they must do their part to support the work happening in classrooms, encouraging their children and following along in their development. For these conversations, remember that the goal of the Common Core state standards is to ensure that our students are prepared to succeed in both college and career. By college ready, we mean that students should be able to take entry-level college courses without remediation. And career readiness means something different than it did a generation ago. Students today will have to compete in a global economy in which employers value the skills emphasized in the Common Core, critical thinking, and a deeper understanding of core concepts that make up the building blocks of math and science. Transitioning to new standards is always challenging, and despite being both fewer and clearer, the Common Core state standards are as rigorous, and in many cases more rigorous than previous standards. This means that they will ask more of both educators and students. If educators are to implement the standards effectively, it will require being open to new ideas and approaches. It will require rethinking how we use classroom time, how we introduce and explore core concepts, and what materials we use in support of student learning. We'll need to try new things, ask questions, communicate with each other as we face new challenges, and put a critical eye to implementation models in order to make sure that they are based in the realities of our classrooms. If we are ever going to push the vision of what instructional excellence looks like beyond where it is today, we must be open to change. Michael Casserly amplifies this point.
All of us know that our urban children need richer and more rigorous instruction, and the Common Core holds the promise that this need can be met. None of us got into this field determined to see that our kids receive mediocre education. We got into it to make sure that our urban kids are recipients of excellence every day.
It will not be easy, but using the standards as the foundation for instruction, and with support, we can work together to create a stronger educational system and a stronger future for all children. We hope that this video has helped you take one step closer to that ultimate goal. Thank you for watching and for all you do to improve the lives of our children.